Behind me, of course, is Magdalen College, Oxford, the famous face of Oxford, actually. And it's also the place where C.S. Lewis was a don and a fellow for decades here. And he wrote a very important book called The Problem of Pain in the 1940s, which focused on animal pain. And subsequently, he wrote in 1947, I think it was, an article, a paper against vivisection, arguing for its abolition, which caused an enormous amount of controversy. Oxford has always been the home of controversy about animals, and I like to think I made my little contribution to this controversy by giving the first lectures on the theology of animal rights at this place, which is, of course, the famous examination schools where all the lectures are given to undergraduates. Well, here is the famous Ruskin School of Art in the University of Oxford, named, of course, after the famous painter and writer John Ruskin. Ruskin was professor of fine art here, and he resigned his chair in 1885 on account of the opening of the first animal laboratory in the university. Well, here we are in one of the quads of Oriel College, Oxford. And in this quad we see these statuettes of John Henry Newman, of course, now Saint John Henry Newman, and by his side is Bishop Joseph Butler, both incidentally alumni of Oriel College. Now, Bishop Butler was a great Anglican divine who became Bishop of Durham, and he wrote a celebrated book in the 1730s, I believe, entitled The Analogy of Religion. In it, he argued for the immortality of animals as well as the immortality of human beings. And his argument was quite simple and I think really quite interesting. It is that during a human being's life, we go through various disillusions, various fundamental changes in skin, appearance, all kinds of changes. He asks this fundamental question: if we have all these dissolutions throughout our life, and yet we still have a sense of an I, of a sense of me, why should we think that the physical dissolution represented by death should fundamentally extinguish the I we have? Namely, in his words, the soul. Behind me is the great college of Christ Church, founded by Cardinal Wolsey, one of the earliest colleges of the university. Now, in the 1880s, a number of dons, led by Charles Dodson, otherwise known as the writer Lewis Carroll, proposed a motion to convocation to defund the new animal lab. Sadly, it failed. Lewis Carroll subsequently wrote his famous satire about vivisection. The last fallacy of all being that it was ludicrous to think that if you started experimenting on animals, you wouldn't also experiment upon humans. And of course that's been shown to be true, because since the 1880s there's been experiments on people of colour, on children, and on prisoners of war, to take only 3 examples. I'm standing in front of the University Church in Oxford, and this is where no less a person than John Henry Newman, who was to become a cardinal and has recently been canonised a saint, in his Good Friday sermon compared the suffering of innocent animals to the suffering of Christ himself. He also famously wrote that cruelty to animals is as if someone did not love God. Behind me is the famous Bodleian Library at Oxford, and one of the librarians in 1875, a pioneer in animal thought, namely E.W.B. Nicholson, wrote the first book on the rights of animals. Behind me is Lincoln College, Oxford, where no less a person than John Wesley, who inaugurated Methodism, was chaplain, And in 1781 he preached in defence of the immortality of animals, a sermon largely forgotten, alas, by Methodists. He was also, at least for some time, a vegetarian and opposed to blood sports. Behind me here is Harris Manchester College, and inside is memorialised a person called Frances Power Cobbe. Of course, women couldn't be members of the university in the 19th century, but she was a close associate of James Martineau, the then principal, and she was a leader in the movement for the protection of children, rights of women, and also the rights of animals. What is more, she was effectively the leader of the anti-vivisection movement in this country, and her archives are situated in this building. You'll notice in front of the college is the motto, to truth, to liberty, and to religion, which rather summarises in a few words the position of Unitarians, because they were fighting for truth as they saw it, and they were denied religious liberty. But notice the order: truth, liberty, religion. Over here is Mansfield College, where I was a fellow for 8 years, holding the first post in theology and animal welfare, the world's first post actually, not just in Oxford, and where I wrote many of my seminal works, including Animal Theology, published in '94. Mansfield is also the place where Albert Schweitzer came and gave his first lectures on reverence for life.